In March of 1940, Leif and Emma Pew were living in the Octave gold mine located about 20 miles from Wickenburg, Arizona. I was born in Wickenburg on the 3rd of March 1940. My memories of this period are hazy. However, I remember a little about my brother Dean. I also recall getting locked in the closet of an empty house. I was very scared and for many years suffered from claustrophobia. We moved to Torrance, California in 1942. I remember playing around the railroad tracks close to our house. My brother Robert Dean died in July of 1944. My father decided to return to work for American Smelting and Refining Company. We moved to Hanover, New Mexico, in the winter of 1944, and it was very cold. Later, we moved to Santa Rita, a few miles away. Our house overlooked the open-pit copper mine owned by Kennecott Copper. I began school here in Santa Rita and attended 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grades. I used to ride many of the wild burros in the area. One day, a friend, Tudor Williams, and I decided to catch a pinto horse we found in the field behind our house. Somehow we managed to get a rope around his neck, but we were not strong enough to make him move. I spotted a board and decided to use it on his behind. I hit him as hard as I could. His hoof shot out quickly, kicking me full in the face and cutting my right cheek all the way through. I was rushed to the hospital where they sewed my cheek back together. I was very sick for a few weeks. Around 1948, my parents purchased an old army barracks in Deming, New Mexico, and moved it up to Pinos Altos. My dad put the barracks on a 1/2 acre of land he had purchased and remodeled it into our family home. We had an outhouse and a well on the property. We had to dig a cistern to catch rainwater as a part of our drinking water supply. One night after a rainstorm, Dad went out to look in the cistern to see how much water we had. He was holding a light at the end of a long extension cord, and I came up behind him to grab the light by its socket so that I could see into the cistern also. Fortunately, Dad was able to pry my hands from the wet metal light socket, or I would surely have been electrocuted. Our school at Pinos Altos was a 2-room building. Each row represented a grade. I was fascinated with the general store post office combination in this lonely one-horse town. We moved to Deming, New Mexico in 1950. We had our house moved back to Deming into a double lot. We were on the southwest outskirts of town. Our 4 years in Deming were very enjoyable. My mother was the hospital dietitian, and I used to go there each day for lunch. I made the acquaintance of an old man who was a patient there in the hospital. Jack Hutchison was a 92-year-old when I first met him. I stopped in to visit him almost every day, and we became good friends. He would recall stories from his days as a cowboy and from when he worked on the railroad. Dad became very active in the church in Deming and served as the branch president for most of the 4 years we lived there. At the time of the dedication of our branch chapel, several general authorities from the church came to our meeting. As a deacon, I sat at a card table with Elder Harold B. Lee and Elder Spencer W. Kimball and ate lunch. While living in Deming, my family began a tradition that lasted until I graduated from high school. From 1950 to 1958, I spent each summer vacation with my sister and her husband in California. Harold and I had many interesting experiences.
Harold had bought a motorcycle. It was called a Mustang. It wasn't much of a motorcycle in those days, but that's what it looked like. It seemed like a pretty big thing to me at those times, but as you can see, there's no back seat. Oh, I generally rode in the back seat, and he on the front. We put a little pad back there, and I would hold on, and we would buzz every place. And to go along with that, he after I don't know, for a couple of summers, he would let me ride that. It didn't have a license at the time, so it must have been 14, 15. I'd ride it through the neighborhood in Wilmington for 15, 20 minutes.
He was on a bowling league with friends from work.
We went to work in the late afternoon, about 3 or 4, and got off at midnight in the morning. And so those summers, what he would do, and it was out of his way, but he would come back home about midnight on his motorcycle or in the car, whichever it happened to be that time. He'd pick me up, and I'd go over, and I'd go and just sit and watch him bowl about 4 in the morning. And we did that once a week. I just loved that, just fun for me. But you can see us carrying a bowling bag on the Mustang. We did that occasionally.
We often went to the Pike Amusement Park in Long Beach. I always enjoyed hearing Virginia sing. Her beautiful voice touched my spirit. In 1954, we moved to a small 10-family mining camp just outside of Patagonia, Arizona. We had to drive 40 miles into Nogales to attend church, which consisted of a branch of a Tucson Sunday school. This was not a very exciting place for a 14-year-old boy. My brother Glenn helped to get me interested into photography at this time. We managed a small boarding house at the trench mine where we also lived. I had a room to myself that I could use for a darkroom, and I enjoyed many hours working on developing and printing pictures. In 1955, Dad was transferred to the Groundhog Unit, Vanadium, New Mexico, near Silver City. I attended Cobra High School in Bayard, where Mother worked in the cafeteria. During my 3 years at Cobra, I was involved in many activities, including chess club and photography club. I worked on the yearbook and served as the school photographer. On May 10, 1958, I graduated from high school. I was thrilled to have Harold and Virginia and Glenn and Louise come to New Mexico to attend my graduation. All through high school, I planned to become an electrical engineer like my brother Glenn. When in 7th grade, I had been quite impressed with my history teacher, Mr. Truman, and felt a deep desire to teach history. However, I convinced myself that teaching would not be as good as engineering, so I pursued my original plan to become an engineer upon entering Brigham Young University in the fall of 1958. I secured residence at the newly opened Helaman Halls, rooming with a friend from El Paso, Larry Kleinman. My first year was an academic disaster. I struggled with all the basic engineering courses. Math and physics were very difficult, and I became frustrated, refusing to apply myself to the task. I made the mistake of convincing my parents that I needed my car at school. The next thing I knew, I had to get a job to support the expenses of having the car. By the end of my second year, I was failing badly and was finally dropped due to low scholarship. This was a tremendous blow to my ego. The most rewarding event of my BYU experience occurred in May of 1959. Les Young and I were taking pictures at a ward dance. Les had made a comical cutout that you put your head through to take a picture. Near the end of the evening, 2 girls came up to have their pictures taken. One of the girls had a strand of her hair that had fallen over her cheek. I stepped over to adjust her hair and immediately felt a stirring within me that is difficult to describe. I knew I had to get to know this girl better. After the girls went on their way, I had a problem because no one seemed to know who this girl was. Les thought her name might be Sharon Healy. During the next week, I summoned my courage for a telephone call to a Sharon Healy to invite her to the annual ROTC dance. She accepted, although one of her roommates, who served on the genealogy committee with me, had told her that I was much too old for her. I suppose my serious attitude and my mustache made me look older than my 19 years. Sharon was only 6 months younger than I. We became good friends quickly. A few weeks later, Sharon returned to Southern California for the summer. We wrote many letters, and I traveled to Pasadena to visit with her and meet her family. We became engaged on Sharon's birthday in September of 1959. On March 11, 1960, we were married in the Salt Lake Temple. My dad and mother came from New Mexico to go through the temple with us. Sharon's dad and stepmother came from Los Angeles to attend the open house held in our honor at the home of Sharon's aunt, Vida Fox Clausen. Glenn surprised us with a phone call saying that he was at the Salt Lake airport. We enjoyed a short visit with him. Sharon was aware of my problem at school. She gave me her constant encouragement and support. We struggled on in Provo until the fall of 1961, when we moved to Southern California. Harold had encouraged me to take a job with Aerojet General where he worked. I was haunted by the feelings of not finishing school. I knew I had to finish my education, but I did not know when or where. In November of 1961, I received a letter from the government ordering me to report to my local draft board in New Mexico. Upon completing my physical examination in El Paso, Texas, discussion with Army enlistment personnel convinced me that the best choice for me was to join the Army rather than wait to be drafted. January of 1962 found me at Fort Ord, California, wondering if I had made the correct decision. Sharon had moved in with her parents in Flint Ridge, and I never felt so alone and lost in my life. My ROTC training at BYU played an important role in determining my conditions for the next 6 months at Fort Ord. Upon arriving at my basic training unit, it was discovered that I had the most military experience of any man present. This led to my being chosen as the platoon guide, acting sergeant, which afforded me leadership training and some special privileges, including a room to myself. It was cold and wet most of the time that winter at Fort Ord. It seemed it always rained when we were doing our rifle training, and I ended up lying in a hole of water. The week we spent on bivouacs was miserable. It rained hard, and our clothes were all soaked through. The most difficult adjustment of this time was not seeing Sharon. Only once during the 10-week basic training were we allowed to have visitors. Harold and Virginia drove Sharon up to see me on this occasion. Following basic training, I spent 3 months in Basic Army Administration School. Again, I became the platoon guide and was allowed off base almost every weekend. Sharon would drive north to Santa Maria, and I would take the bus south. We would spend Friday night and Saturday together. On weekends, when we couldn't meet, I would catch a bus to San Carlos and visit with Glenn and his family.